Hello, I'm Beth Britton. I support Dementia Community with their communications work. Welcome and thank you for joining us for our second May webinar. Before we get on to the topic for today, I just wanted to briefly explain a bit more about Dementia Community. Dementia Community is a charitable community benefit society, a membership cooperative that provides learning and networking opportunities for the dementia care community. Dementia Community's core purpose is to connect and empower the dementia care community. Dementia Community's vision is of a world where all people in the dementia care community feel connected, informed, empowered, and purposeful, and are actively engaged in co-producing changes that improve everyone's experiences of dementia in care and in wider society. To sum up, if you are aware of the National Dementia Action Alliance before it's disbanded, we hope that Dementia Community is a replacement for the NDAA. Community members own a £1 community share in Dementia Community, and membership is open to everyone. So if you aren't already a member, do join us. There are both benefits and opportunities for all of our members. My colleague Beth Lang will put a link in the chat that will take you to our membership page. If you're having any difficulties in joining Dementia Community, please do message Beth or myself and we will do our best to help. So, on to the topic for today's webinar. Our topic today is, can lie-telling be used to support personhood? I will introduce you to our speaker shortly, but just some brief housekeeping first. We are recording this webinar, so if you don't want your face on the recording, please turn your camera off. Please use the chat for your questions. We will have a Q&A and discussion after the presentation, and we'll be keeping an eye on the chat. We hope to have some live participation too. So if you would like to ask your question, please do raise your hand at the end and we will have a chat with you. Afterwards, Beth Lang will email you the slides. The recording will also go onto our YouTube channel, Journal of Dementia Care, so do look out for that. There are lots of recordings of previous webinars on there already if you've missed any of our fabulous speakers that we've had so far this year. So let's get started. Let's meet our fabulous speaker for today. So Dr. Jane Murray is an assistant professor at Northumbria University. Welcome, Jane. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you for having me. Gosh. Now, I'm not as good with Zoom as I am with Teams, so apologies if I'm a little bit clunky with this, but let's hope. So that should be, can everybody see that okay? Yeah.
I can see that, yeah.
Excellent. So I did get a bit adventurous and I have put some QR codes and Jamboard things in, but what I've decided to do is we'll just use the chat for today, but if after the session anybody wants to scan the QR code and add things to the Jamboard, then I'll follow that up tomorrow. So this is something that I've been really interested in for a lot of years. I've been a mental health nurse for over 30 years and I've worked at the university for quite a long time now. But it always comes back to people. And my PhD was about, do we tell lies and can we classify them? So a lot of this is about how we use lie telling and sort of starting to think beyond that. So, you know, can lie telling be used to support personhood? Yes, for me, it absolutely can. Now, what's probably going to happen is there is some people in the audience that are going to go, well, I completely disagree with you. That's absolutely fine. Some people are going to go, yeah, we use it. It doesn't kind of matter whether you agree or disagree. It's about starting the conversation, because one of the things that we use to change practice is about talking to each other and listening to other people's opinions. So it's going to be a mixed response, and I'm not going to be offended if somebody says, you know, I completely disagree with what you're saying. That's absolutely fine. We'll agree to disagree, but that doesn't stop us having the conversation or anybody challenge me about it. So, you know, feel free and keep that going. So just to throw it into the mix to start with, do you tell lies at home? And if you want to pop that into the chat, that would be really helpful. Or if you're into using the QR codes, but do you tell lies at home? Just stick yes, no, thumbs up in the chat, whatever you like.
Got quite a few people, Jane, saying yes, lots of yeses.
Oh, we've got a no as well.
Occasionally.
Yeah. Right, now I'm loving the fact that somebody's put white ones because we'll come on to this. Oh, somebody said they can't hear me. I think, Samantha, I think that must be yours. Your
Oh,
kid.
Samantha, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
I think sound for everyone else is fine. It's certainly okay for me. Sometimes it helps to leave and come back. So that might be something you could do, or try a different device.
Yes, constantly, and to my children at Christmas. I would kind of challenge, so it's interesting that somebody's put in white ones, and I'll come back to that. But at home, we tend to tell lies an awful lot more than we think. And I'll come on to that, and we do at work as well. But we've got Santa Claus, we've just had the Easter Bunny, and if anybody did see a white rabbit dropping off chocolate eggs, please let me know, because he's probably worth a fortune, because he kind of doesn't really exist. We've got the Tooth Fairy, anybody with teenage kids, when they come downstairs for a night out, does my bum look big in this? In our house, I would never have said, yeah, absolutely, can you go and get changed? It would be absolutely not, it looks fine. So, we do it all the time. The other things to think about are how much time we spend convincing people that we look differently or we behave differently. And social media is a real proponent of how do we deceive people. A lot of people don't think about things like we use false eyelashes, we use makeup, we use Photoshop, and they're all in an effort to deceive, to present a different image to the one that we actually have in reality. So we absolutely do tell lies at home. Just trying to get the slides to change. So, do you tell lies at work? Is it different? I'll just wait till we get some in the chat. Is your answer different for work compared to home? Yes, to my manager, love that.
I think yes is a winning so far.
Right. One of the interesting things, or I think it's interesting, but obviously I am biased, is that when I did this piece of research, what it showed up was that we unconsciously tell untruths all of the time. But for me, it's really important that we do, because it's a social lubricant. And I think Sue McGowan's telling fibs. Yeah, and it is about, somebody else has put, it's about navigating, and it's about navigating that communication, because for lots of people on the call, you might not be in a leadership role, but lots of people perform, they don't have that in the title, but they are absolute leaders, particularly when we're working with people with really challenging labels. And how do we support people? And sometimes we do have to navigate the truths, because sometimes the truth is just too much for people to deal with or cope with at the time. And then it also begs other questions about whose truth, which I'm going to come on to. So the important part for me, the important standing point, is to go back to personhood. And in the JDC edition that's just come out today, I've got a rant about what's happened to personhood. And it's important that we go back to, it's a standing or status that's bestowed on one human being by others in the context of relationship and social being. And for me, but it's really, really important that this is everything that we do in care or supporting people with dementia. It's about people. And sometimes I think we get hung up on, oh, we work with older people, we work with people with dementia, because for me, we work with people, and that's kind of where it should stop. And it's about thinking about how do we maintain those relationships. And one of the things in all of the current documents that gets missed is personhood. We talk about person-centered care. And at the end of the day, nobody exists as an island. And for me, good care is about maintaining personhood and maintaining relationships and delivering that relationship-centered care. Nobody, you know, I work an awful lot into Asia. At the minute, it's predominantly, it's been China and Malaysia, but at the moment it's predominantly Singapore. And these are very much collectivist countries where families make decisions. And we think about the UK as being much more of an individualistic society, but kind of, is it really? Because if you are in a relationship either with friends or with family, do you ever make a massive decision without discussing it with somebody else? Because we often reflect or bounce things off. And I think, you know, hopefully as nurses, you know, we are reflective. And as healthcare practitioners and healthcare assistants, you know, you go home and you don't leave your job at work, you go home and reflect. So it's about thinking about during the day, who have you interacted with and how have you supported those relationships? In terms of supporting personhood, what's really important is when Kitwood first developed this was about relationships with people. And it probably would be considered in terms of face-to-face. However, we live in a very different era now. You know, we're 50, 60 years on, and supporting personhood often might mean maintaining a relationship with pets, for example, with a dog, with a cat. It might be with maintaining it with the environment. It could be, you know, people are maintaining environments on mobile phones, on tablets, through social media. And kind of at the stage we're at now with the age group that I would class as sort of the very old, the 80 plus, we perhaps haven't got that many people who are that tech savvy and using phones and social media to maintain their personhood. This is going to change massively in the next 10 years. Over the next 10 years, we're going to have this big push where people are much more active and we can support personhood very much in a tech fashion. And currently I'm looking at quite a few different projects where we're looking at how do people with dementia use apps, and they're going to be really important. So it's about that relationship-centered care and where does lying fit in terms of relationships. Now, when you look at the literature, and a lot of people will immediately go, oh, well, I don't tell lies. And if you go back to the original Kitwood stuff, Kitwood talks about lie telling as being a malignant social psychology. Now, that's a really damning thing. And what was coming through from the chat is people were putting other words for lies because we tried to step away from, oh, it's a white lie. It's just a little lie. And we try to water it down. But actually, we need to talk about it because lie telling's fine. It's not, you know, truth should always be the starting point, but it's not always the end point. And remember that when I'm talking about this, I'm talking specifically about when we interact with people who've got moderate to severe dementia, whose short-term memory will be very impaired and their short-term memory is virtually non-existent. So that's kind of the community that I used for my own research. Just before we go on to the next bit, I just want to revisit the bookcase. Now, the bookcase, a lot of you will know, and I much prefer doing this in front of an audience where you can actually see me waving my arms about. Yeah, therapeutic lying is really interesting, David, and I'll come on and show you why. I think it's a nonsense. For me, I suppose when I did my research, I'm very black and white. It's either a lie or it's the truth. And when you look at the report, the Toby Williamson report for the Mental Health Foundation, that's really interesting because they again go back to a scale of lie telling. And I'm going to show you a much more objective, well, I think it's objective taxonomy in terms of if it's not the truth, it is a lie, but that's fine. And one of the big things I think we need to change is how we view lying, because it's not this massive negative thing, which I'll come on to show you why. I think absolutely pets and dolls are something that I really struggled with in practice. I don't like doll therapy because it gives me the creeps. That's my issue. I've also seen it work really, really well. But one of the things we need to consider is, and really be honest with ourselves, is if we give a robotic pet or a robotic doll or a doll to somebody, are we giving it as a toy? Or are we giving it as a lie? And I would argue that 99% of the time we give it as a lie. We use a baby, we're giving them a baby to resolve some issues, and it is absolutely a lie. Is it unethical? If we have explored things and we know the person and it's supporting personhood, I think it is ethical to use those, but we have to check that out. The bookcases, and this is just to kind of show where I come from on this. Apologies, because a lot of you will know the bookcases, but just for those that don't, dementia and people are a bit like having two bookcases. One is your Harry Potter bookcase. It's carved out of one piece of oak. It's huge, it's solid, it's not moving. And that person, it's full of books. And as the wind or the dementia comes and blows this solid emotional bookcase, nothing comes off because it's solid. And that's the reflection that emotions stay intact throughout dementia. There is always a person in there. We might not be able to access them and we might not understand it. However, it's still there. The other bookcase we bought at IKEA. And we got it home and we scrabbled the instructions up because we don't really need them. And you've got to the end and you've got 3 screws left and it's just not as great. And it's full of books. And as that dementia or the wind comes, this IKEA type bookcase is starting to move. And very quickly that top shelf comes off. So very early on in most people's dementia journey, today's memories are going to go. And then a bit more, then last week, then last month, then last year, until we get down to somebody's knees, which, as we know, is quite often around their late teens, early 20s. And that's often where people stop. And the reason I'm sharing that with you is because that is often where the person with dementia has time shifted to. So a lot of the work by Ian James and his team around time shifting. If somebody is living in that time, that is their truth. It might not be our truth, but it's their truth. So then it begs the question, as health professionals, whose truth should we use? And why should I enforce my truth onto somebody who is time shifted? Because I don't think that's fair. So sometimes if someone is, say, it's approaching tea time, they want to be out because they need to go and get the children from school, their mother's looking for them. Is it fair to say to them, your mother's dead, she'd be 102? Or is it fairer to say, your mum just rang and she said she's missed the bus, could you have a cup of tea and she won't be long? Because that is going along with them, it's validating them and it's using their truth. Or do we stick with my truth? Now, for those that have been in healthcare a long time, I trained more than 30 years ago, and it was orientate, orientate, orientate. And yet a lot of the things that we do are based on my truth and not the person with dementia's truth. And you have to challenge, is that fair? Because that just gives me the power and it becomes very negative. So, some of the, if you think about the MMSE, what day of the week is it? If you're asking that to somebody in 24-hour care, what does it matter other than if it's Friday, it's fish and chips, and if it's Sunday, it's going to be a roast? It doesn't matter necessarily. What matters is what's supporting their personhood. What relationships will they engage with today? Who will they engage with today? That's what matters. So for me, it's always about the person with dementia and it's about people. Then it's about starting to think, what is a lie? So somebody put in before about a therapeutic lie. And as professionals, we've hid behind this title of therapeutic lie for a long, long time. And what I started to explore with my work was, who says it's therapeutic? Therapeutic for me or therapeutic for the receiver? So the next slides that I'm going to show you are based on an ethnography that I did. And what I did was I put on a staff nurse uniform and I went back and I worked with 2 teams of nurses in the Northeast on inpatient wards with people with moderate to severe dementia. And I observed all of the lies being told over 45 shifts. And I documented them. I kept a notebook in my pocket, and there's a couple of them I documented absolutely verbatim because I could do that without being without causing any suspicion or distress to the people with dementia. Some of them I watched and observed and then wrote them down straight away. They were then triangulated with the person who told them, so I could just check, was it a lie? Because sometimes it might not have been. And then I went on to observe what the resulting outcome of it was. And what I ended up with was some, I think it's interesting, but obviously I'm biased, was a set of 6 different lies. And basically anything that was not the whole truth was recorded as a lie. And we ended up with 6 categories. Some of them you'll recognise, and some of them you might go, ugh, that's not a lie. That's fine. For me, these are all lies because they're not the truth. Now, the blatant one are the obvious ones. Now, giving meds, really common. Yeah, I've just brought this drink for you, it'll make you feel better. Nobody then went on to say it will also possibly give you diarrhea, it might give you stomach cramps, you'll dribble, or it might give you a dry mouth, it's going to give you a tremor, increase your risk of falls. This will make you better. Clearly not. Oh, I can't answer that. I'll tell you what, when the doctor comes, I'll ask him, pass in the book, when you know the answer full well. And that kind of sits with deferring to a higher authority as well. And searching for family members was a common one, where there was just blatant lies told very effectively and had a good outcome. Going along with is quite a contentious one. For me, going along with is a lie, because often I was going along with people's emotions and I had no idea what they'd said to me, but yeah, oh, it'll be fine, let's go and get a cup of tea. Oh yes, absolutely. And distracting somebody. If you follow the work of Naomi Fail and validation, she would argue that going along with is not lie telling. For me, it is. Everybody's going to have a different answer. We mentioned props and dolls before. I think they're a brilliant, not so much dolls, because as I say, I do struggle with that. But for me, I have a lot of animals, and to support my personhood, should I end up with dementia, it would be very important to me to have things like robotic cats and things, because that would maintain my relationship with things I've had all of my life. The other things are false environments and false money. The false money one can be a really important one. Often people have always had cash in their pockets and find it quite distressing in hospital not to have cash. So we made a lot of cash thing. Lee, I'll come back to that because we'll pick that up. I don't think it is, because I think it helps to maintain the relationships, but we'll pick that up when I've finished. And false environments. So the second day of data collection for this is was the World Cup started, and the ward I was on started, they converted the sitting room into a bar and were giving out non-alcoholic drinks and cherryade as Prosecco. And so that just kind of really made me think about the false environments that we use. They are a lie, but they can be very effective. Avoidance and delaying were really common ones. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Familiarity and banter I've left to last, because familiarity, Sue will come back to that one as well, because we use that in one of our local hospitals. In terms of familiarity, we get told not to use pet names. So, you know, you'll hear from my accent, I'm based up in Newcastle, in the northeast. Hello, pet, are you all right? Are you all right, Hinny? Pet, Hinny are really common terms, and we're told not to use them because it's disrespectful. Actually, this is the only category of lies where the pet or the Hinny or the familiar term was specific to the teller and not the receiver. So if you're working with a member of staff who says honey, darling, pet, or whatever, they will say it to the patients, and the patient's clearly not a pet, but they'll probably say it to the consultant, the pharmacist, the staff nurse, the colleagues. It's specific to them, and it's something that's very difficult to stop. But also, it was never received negatively. Now, I suspect this is an age thing, because the older people that I observed always responded really well and would often use the term pet back because it's very local and colloquial. However, if I was out I don't know, it was our local shopping centre, the Metro Centre, for a deal, for a meal, and somebody put my dinner down and said, there you are, pet, I would be rolling my eyes and I wouldn't be very happy. So in the older population that I studied, it wasn't an issue. Status familiarity was around people with dementia who'd perhaps had, so for example, one of them was a ship's engineer and he'd always been called boss while he was on the ships. And if you needed him to engage in an activity such as eating or drinking or taking his tablets, people would address him as the boss. There was another lady would be called auntie, and these were really, really important. If you're working with some of the African cultures, auntie can be a really important term because culturally, a lot of the older or more mature women are called auntie, and they'll respond better to that than they would the name. The last category is banter. Now, banter is the only category of lies that the receiver, so the person with dementia, was aware that they were being told a lie. And banter gets a lot of bad press because they say it's associated in sports with bullying, with masculinity and all sorts of things. However, in the context that I'm looking at it's where the receiver and the teller are both aware that what they are saying is not true, but they choose to go along with it anyway. So one that was observed on more than one occasion was a patient leaving the room or a member of staff leaving the room, see you later, alligator, in a while, crocodile. And this happened a couple of times where the person with dementia completely engaged with it. I've got lots more examples, which I can't go into, but if anybody wants any more examples, and I have got another article coming out later this month in a different journal where you can explore those, or people can email me if they want to look at some more of the data. Jokes is on the end of it, but jokes, probably I should put it in red to be fair, because jokes are not fair unless the person with dementia knows that it's a joke. If they don't know it's a joke, it's not banter, it's just mean, because they don't understand it. And you're probably, as Lee said earlier, is there something about mockery there? And that's where mockery would very much come into jokes. So the banter one is one that people struggle with, but if you looked at some of the examples I collected, people might understand why. For me, I feel that that's where it sits in the taxonomy. I'm going to come back to the bus stop when we've finished. But out of all of this, the thing is, reflection is key, because a lot of over the period of time, I collected over 250 lies. A lot of them, people weren't aware that they were actually saying them. And what became apparent was we actually tell lies as part of normal speech. It's an important social lubricant, and we tell them all the time, because all of the previous work had said to people, when do you tell lies? And they said, oh, only when a person's distressed, only to reduce distress, only when it's therapeutic. And that's not what happens. We need to reflect either. Sometimes if it's a planned lie, we need to reflect beforehand, but sometimes if an interaction's gone really well or it's gone really badly, we need to reflect after it. And what I then looked at was the lie arm. So it's about the affective reflective model. This is thinking about the emotion of lie telling. And when we have a communication, you have to decide for yourself how you said it. Did you say it with genuineness or did you say it with indifference? Now, one of the interesting parts of this is it depends where you are in your shift. If you've worked a long day and you're at 12 hours, you're heading for handover, it's very difficult if the environment's very busy and people are very repetitive, it's very difficult to say something with that level of genuineness. So sometimes, we give a retort simply to disengage from the conversation because we're exhausted, we're burnt out. And the only ineffective or negative lie that I saw out of the 250, and that it only sat in that red box for about 7 to 9 seconds, was a gentleman who had every night after tea, can I go home? Can I go home? I want to be out. I want to be out, constantly. And he would do this for quite a long period of time. Nurse came through a locked door, locked it behind her. And he said, let us out, pet. And she said, oh, sorry, I can't. I haven't got a key. He says, well, you liar. He says, you've just come through it. By the time he turned round and gone to the next member of staff, can you let us out? And it was forgotten. But in that second, he clearly, and that's because it was just like indifference. You know what? Please don't keep asking me the same question, was the emotion behind it. You can say just about anything. If you say it kindly and with genuineness to meet the needs of the patient, it will nearly always have a positive effect. But the lies that I observed either had zero effect or they had a very good effect. And if you tell them to meet the needs of the person, they will have a positive effect if you say it with genuineness and kindness. It's when you move into that indifference or you're doing it to disengage because you just can't deal with that anymore. So if it's to meet your needs or you can't say it with genuineness, it will probably be ineffective and have limited impact. Its potential then will be negative. However, the content in this group of people with dementia, the content and the words are far less important than the emotion behind it. It's really important that we're always kind and that the emotion is honest. Thank you. I'll go back to yeah, I would agree, David. We do need it. It's always about the person with dementia, and it's how we're responding to them and meeting their needs. And I suppose this answers what you're saying in a way. For me, the key messages are always be genuine. Want to do. I've done this job for over 30 years, and I still love it. Validate the recipient's emotions and do it for the right reasons. And that's not always easy. We've just come out of a major pandemic and, there was times when that was really, really hard. But, always be kind, be genuine. It's about the people and meeting that person where they are in their dementia journey. This is my opinion, quite happy to have it challenged. I think lie telling is a really effective intervention that can be really kind. I think it supports personhood and you can use it to maintain relationships. And for me, my truth is no more important than the truth of the person with dementia. Any questions? I have written a couple of questions down out of the chat so I can come back to them. If I could work out how to...
That was super. Thank you so much, Jane. If you want to stop sharing.
I'm trying.
So we can see you, because that would be absolutely fabulous.
Yes.
I'm also just trying to catch up on the chat, a bit like you. There's quite a lot in there.
If anybody can help me how to stop chatting.
There should be a stop sharing at the top.
Yeah. Oh, hang on, it's come up there now. Sorry, that's it.
That was just fabulous, Jane. So first of all, thank you so much. Really, really interesting. Really interesting to see your diagram where you talked about what you'd observed and all those different elements of what you felt were lying. As you say, that is your interpretation, but I think many would agree with you. And the chat has been absolutely alive. I think since I've been hosting these webinars, this is the first time we've had this much interaction in the chat. I've been dragged into it as well. So it's been really, really interesting. Is there anything you wanted to start with, Jane? And does anybody want to ask Jane a question? Do raise your hand.
I'm going to just go back to Lee Woodward's comment, because he was talking about making a mockery of people. I don't know whether, Lee, whether you want to put the camera on and expand on that, or...
Hello, sorry, it's Lee. I'm female.
Oh, sorry. Gosh, what an assumption. Excellent.
That's okay. No, I was meaning in terms of with the dolly, and I just
Yeah.
feel that if it was me, for example, I would feel, I know that I wouldn't know, but I would feel like people were mocking me if I was looking at myself in the future in that situation.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean by that, really. I do understand the benefits that there are for it.
Yeah, I think I really struggled with doll therapy in practice until I was a nurse back in the days when we had different titles, but nursing home liaison for people with challenging behaviour. And we had some, you know, it wasn't the behavioural support team. And I was going into a care home, and a very elderly lady who'd been a nanny for many years. Daughter couldn't cope with and meet mum's needs anymore. Mum had gone to the care home, and the daughter felt she had to come every single day, and it was just awful. It was traumatic for everybody, because every time that mum left, the daughter went to leave, mum would become distraught. The daughter would be distressed, and then there would be lorazepam involved, which wasn't good for anybody. So after lots of discussion, because this is going back, you know, 20 years when we probably discussed it less, and with agreement with everybody, we got one of these newfangled dolls that cries and burps and what have you, and used to give it a bit of a shake and then take it. So the daughter would say what time she wanted to leave. We'd make the doll cry and then go in and give it as a lie, very much as a lie. I can't stop the Ben from crying. And she would go, oh, take it off you. And then she would nurse it, stop it crying. Then our daughter would go, Mum, I'll have to go. And she'd go, all right, see you, pet. And it was fine. And that was kind of the first time I'd really seen dolls being used as very much as a lie, hugely effective, and it saved using lorazepam, which kind of brings me nicely onto the bus stop thing. And I think a lot of people do struggle with the bus stop. Should you have a bus stop? But in the environments, so our local Queen Elizabeth Hospital has a bus stop in the middle of a circular pathway, and it's really effective. And if I look to my older self and think, if I'm distressed and want to go outside, if I believe that there's a bus going to come and I go and sit there, and that lowers my emotion so I can then go back in and have a cup of tea without using medication, I would probably rather do that than be medicated. Debbie?
Hi, Jane, I love what you've covered. I did a research project on what makes gardens more actively used, and the bus stop thing was quite at its height during that study. And we saw both examples exactly of what you've described, but also we saw quite a lot more examples of it causing added confusion. I do domestic garden design as well, and most domestic gardens don't have a bus stop in the back of them. And if a care home garden is intended to be the equivalent of a home's garden, it can create that confusion. And if a bus doesn't turn up for some, that creates the agitation of that they're late, or, you know, what is happening.
Yeah.
So we actually came up with a we sort of refer to it as our anti-gimmick checklist tool, which is a series of 4 questions. And the key to them is about exactly what you said all the way through, about know your resident, know the person living with the dementia, but also know your setting. I happily put the checklist tool key questions into the chat, and a link to an article that explains it fully. But it really comes down to, in the main, actually, most bus stops in most domestic settings would feel wrong. But in some settings, I've seen it used in the front space that feels like a front road place.
Yes.
a public space, and so it can be appropriate, but it has to be used with care, because you can very quickly add additional things in. But I'll add it in the chat. But
oh, lovely, thank you.
love the relationship centered bit.
Yeah,
That came directly to me, Debbie, so if you want to pop it in the chat so everyone can see it, thank you.
and you know, I think the key thing is it's where people are in the journey, remembering that this research was done with moderate to severe. So most of, well, everybody that were on these wards, they'd been admitted because that there was difficulties at home, we couldn't meet the needs at home, and they were very advanced in their journey. If there is any hint that that person has some short-term memory, we can't tell lies. Truth is the starting point. And you know, it's not optional. If the person has some memory, then you've got to stick with the truth, because if there's a chance that you're caught out, if you like, then you know it becomes damaging and distressing. So it is very much about knowing the person and supporting that personhood.
Definitely.
David, I think you were next.
We've got a couple of questions. We have also got one in the chat as well. So yeah, David.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. I think for me, it's just one of those things about both truth telling and lies. They shut people down. And often what we need to do is actually really listen to what the person's trying to tell us. And we try and come up with solutions like a bus stop, rather than actually realising why is the person asking to go home. And even when we lie, we're shutting the person down rather than actually trying to validate what is that feeling behind those words. So I think there's that confusion, isn't there, between the different approaches?
I would probably, for me, I would argue the opposite, that if I tell a lie, I'm supporting that person to explore them. So for example, somebody who is looking for their brother, but the brother's deceased, but they're actually time shifted in their 20s. You know, and I would probably go more down the Naomi failed validation. Oh, so what was your brother called? And engage around the brother, you know, long before. But I would be, if that person still believes the brother is alive and they still continue to look for them, I'm happy to say, or they've rang, as long as they don't have a short-term memory. Because if they're going to remember that the brother then hasn't visited, you're going to cause more distress. So this is very much about people in a quite advanced state of their journey, because it's always got to be about, you know, the thing with a bus stop is, for me, I've seen it used really successfully, but the problem is we lock the door. We put people into 24-hour care environments never to come out again, and they don't go for walks. Now for me, I get up at 6:30 every morning, and then I have a whole series of animals that I go and do. And you know, should I develop dementia, I will still want to go out of the care home door at 6 o'clock in the morning with a bucket, because I've got horses to feed, I've got chickens to feed, I've got eggs to collect, and I've got my dogs to walk. You know, and one of the things that we do in the Northeast, which was done from Northumbria, Professor Glenda Cook and some other colleagues did an amazing thing called the Hensioners, if anybody's seen it. And where they put 2 or 4 hens in a care home. So instead of the bus stop, you put a chicken coop, and engage people who want to be outside with collecting the eggs and collecting the hens. Loads of YouTube videos, is brilliant. I'm currently involved with a project in Bromley in Kent, where we're developing a bottom-up approach. So we've seen the site to develop a facility for people with dementia. And we're hoping to incorporate a lot more of the social farms about the growing and different things like that. Because, you know, 9 times out of 10, when people are agitated, it's because they're bored. You know, for me, there's nothing, I want to walk, I want to be physical, I want to go and do things.
Yeah, absolutely. And Debbie covered a lot of that in our last webinar, which is on our YouTube channel. So do go and have a look at that. I'm going to come to you, Sue and Sally, in a second, but I'm just mindful that Kevin's question went into the chat a while ago. And he said, was there much insight into how family members feel about their relatives being lied to? It's not really something we've covered, Jane. What would you answer to that?
So you can imagine that the ethics for this took 2.5 years. The HRA had a meltdown, IRAS had a meltdown, the trust had a meltdown. So one of the things I got sent out to do to get it through IRAS was to go and meet with families of the inpatients before I went back to ethics for the final time, and go and talk to families. And what absolutely amazed me was that families were like, Lie telling, well, of course I do. Yes. It's, well, we've got to, how would I get through my day? And there was none of the family members or the focus group, the groups of people that I brought together to get through ethics. There was not one family member ever said, please don't tell lies. Now, the Northeast, because we've got Professor Ian James, who's been a leading light in this field for a long, long time. So Ian, through Ian's work, on all of our awards, when somebody's admitted with dementia, the staff, as part of the admissions process, will have a conversation with the family and the person with dementia, if it's possible, but generally the family members, and say, how do you feel about lie telling? What's your stance on it? Where do you sit with it? And how do you feel about us telling lies if your relative is in this situation? So we talk about it regionally much more openly. And there's very little resistance from families. Families are very, very supportive of it, and far less resistance. For staff, it becomes a much more complex issue, particularly if you're registered and you've got your code of conduct. And I'm actually delivering this talk, a tweaked version of this talk to the NMC later in the year, where I'm actually going to ask them to change the NMC code of conduct for nurses, because we've got the confidentiality clause. We have to maintain confidentiality unless it is likely to cause distress or harm, in which case we can breach it. And for me, truth should always be the starting point, but in cases where the whole truth is likely to cause distress, you could use a lie or use the patient's truth. So I'm going to talk to the NMC about that later in the year.
That's really interesting, Jane. Thank you. And just on the bus stops point, because I don't know if we'll come back to that. So the University of Worcester, Shirley came and spoke on a webinar for us last year. Now, sadly, this is not on our YouTube channel because we didn't have permission to publish all of the material, so it's not on there. But on that, Jane, she talked about things like, you know, fake bookcases, and she showed an image of where a care home had this fake bookcase image put on the wall, and residents had been trying to take these books out and gouge.
Yeah.
Now, I presume you would say there, goodness, we're causing distress for people because they can't actually get what they need.
Yeah, but also I would say that at the point of, if somebody is trying to take a book out, then they're at the point of the dementia where they actually want to take a book out. So why have they not got books?
A real book.
Yeah,
a bit of wallpaper.
I mean, the other one that drives me absolutely wild is where you can get a I don't know what you call it, like a decal made of the person's front door, and you put it on the care home door. Now that fills me with absolute horror. You know, and this isn't evidence-based, this is just me, but I think, God, it must be like stepping into Narnia, because every time you open your front door, which you recognise, you get to somewhere that you don't recognise.
So I remember my dad was in care homes, and I remember at one point they used his bedroom door and they turned it into a front door with a fake knocker and a fake letterbox. And of course, these things didn't work. So it just frustrated and confused immensely. Oh, goodness, I could talk to you a lot about this, but let's go to the questions. Sue McGowan, I think you were next. What would you like to ask Jane?
Sorry, not sure why I couldn't unmute myself. I'm a bit of an idiot with that technology.
Don't worry.
I was just actually just reflecting on this, on the bus stop business. I can understand it outside, that kind of works okay for me, but it's just sort of inside that I struggle with. But I was just sort of thinking maybe it's about where you're from, because for me, bus stops, no, I'm from London, so nobody talks when you're standing at a bus stop. If you do, you looked at as though you're a little bit sort of not, you know, a bit weird.
Come north.
Yeah, I will, yeah. You know, and it's also extremely stressful because in London the bus stop never comes anyway. So, you know, maybe it's kind of, for me it'd be a cause of great distress and heartache.
Yeah, and I think that's such a valid point. You know, it comes down to people. Where I grew up in the middle of Gateshead, I live in the middle of nowhere now, so putting a bus stop there for me is an absolute waste of time, because the nearest one's 3 miles away and there's only one bus out and one bus in a day. You know, where I grew up in Gateshead, that was where you used to see the aunties, if you like, you know, those relatives, those female relatives that weren't relatives, who, oh, what have you been up to, and you would chat. And I think people are very much up here, people chat all the time. And it is, and you know, I think that's one of that's why it's got to be about knowing the person, you know, because, you know, and again, you know, there's some things going, you know, Sharon's just put in about the lie has to be relevant to the person in the community. It has to be, you know, this is about how do we sustain relationships, and sometimes we're going to have to enter into that field of not using our truth but the other person's. But let's not get hung up on having to use my truth, because the person with dementia should have the power, and it's their needs I'm trying to meet. I'm going to finish work and go home. So if for that period of time I have to enter somebody else's reality, that's fine, you know. And really, you know, we get so strung up, but it's about that word lie, because it's so emotionally loaded in terms of how we feel about it. And I suppose that's why I want people to have the conversation, because we need to take the sting out of it. It's like talking about cancer 30 years ago, people, C word, it's the L word. Let's talk about it, because you know what, for some people in some circumstances, this might be really useful.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Jane. Thank you, Sue, as well. And we have touched a little bit on validation already. I'm very much hoping, it's not entirely confirmed yet, that we might have Naomi Fell's daughter coming to do a webinar for us before the end of the year, where we will obviously explore in great detail validation, which is one of my great passions. So I'm really excited, and hopefully we can pull that off for you at Dementia Community. Sally, you've got a question you'd like to ask.
Yeah, well done, Jane. Really, really glad you're all talking about this, and really enjoyed your presentation. And yeah, it's something which those of us who've been around a lot have talked about a lot. I suppose I just wanted to acknowledge, although I totally agree with you on most things, just that the piece that David, I think, is touching on in his thing around the emotions piece, I do see it used in a quite glib way and a quite unkind way sometimes. So there is that always that sort of slight warning for me, and I think it is linked to my own value base. Again, I don't know that we've acknowledged that enough, that I was probably one of the few who said, no, I don't lie in my house, because truth and honesty is an incredible part of my integrity. My I think I'm still recovering from when my mother told me that Father Christmas wasn't real, so it probably goes
deep-seated.
It probably goes right back to that, and with my own daughter and my partner, I think, yeah, it's truthful communication is very core to my integrity. So I've always struggled with the fact that I do encourage people to use lies when it is, you know, as you say, going alongside their own truth. That's, as you say, the fine thing. So I suppose it's to acknowledge that we need to look at our own values and upbringing and things in as part of all these things. And that links to our regional backgrounds, you know, the London piece versus the Northeast piece. And just on the environments thing, I just wanted to say, I've just written an article on this topic called using murals in care homes, which I'll send to Beth.
Oh, that'd be lovely, yeah.
But one of the examples I give in that article is of a home in Devon, which I've worked in, where they had a fake stable with a horse. You would love it, Jane.
Oh yeah, that'd be me.
I'm gone. Again, lots of people might say, oh, that's, you know, not a real horse. It might be really upsetting, but there was porridge all the way down the door where the horse had been fed. And I think the real test for me is the well-being that was so evident from people going to feed the horse. I mean, obviously, we'd all much rather it was a real horse, and I hope you will keep on that. But so some of the reservations about murals, which I do share, I have been sort of proven wrong in terms of seeing the evident, you know, well-being out of what's being enjoyed by some of those things. But we would all say we'd rather have the real books than the fake books and all of those things as well.
But you know, I think it's interesting because I work into a lot of different cultures. So I manage a nursing program in Singapore, and I have done in Shanghai. And so in Singapore, I work with a lot of different cultures and that have different beliefs about things like the afterlife, about poltergeist, about spiritual needs and things. So, you know, the reflective tool works. It doesn't matter which culture you are, because it's about you thinking about, was I genuine? Because for me, I suppose because I've been studying it in such detail, I've stepped away a little bit from content, and it's more about that. It's about that affect, if you like. So I would always be genuine and truthful in my interaction in terms of the emotion and the genuineness and wanting to help. That's always absolutely 100%. Would the content reflect that? Not always, because for me, if we're going to support the emotion, if I have to use different words, that's less important. But it's absolutely acknowledging, and sometimes, sometimes I haven't come across it, but I've certainly read literature where, if you go back to the Bloom stuff in the 1980s, where all of her research was, and the original taxonomy was around asking home carers. And there's a more recent one by Seaman and Stone that was done in Florida in, I think it's 2019 or 2021. And people in early stages of dementia were saying, I don't ever want to be lied to and I don't want to be deceived. But what we've got to bear in mind, not all lies deceive, but all deception is a lie. This is a one for a different time, but we all go, people have all seen magic shows. People watch Britain's Got Talent on a Saturday night and a magician comes on and you want to be deceived. So it's about how do we reconcile. I don't tell lies, but I'll watch a magician. I don't tell lies, but I'll wear makeup. I'll put false tan on. So, when people, I think I've become much more flexible in my approach to it, because I know what I'm comfortable saying and doing, and I have to stick with that for me, and I would never force it on anybody else. But I would ask other people to reflect on their own motivations for why they do something. And if you decide to go with your own truth and not the person with dementias, why? Because if you're going to cause distress to that person that you're there to support, that's not fair. So, I don't have any right and wrong answers. This is just what I saw observing what's happening in life. And I would be really interested to repeat my study in different environments, which, your PhD is about the only time that you actually get this privilege of being able to do it, because I would love to record the lies that are being told in a household.
The one that you mentioned, which perhaps is the only thing that jarred for me in your whole presentation, where the man saw the person going through the door and was lied to about the key.
Yeah.
And arguably he might forget a few minutes later, but for me, he will still have inside him the sense that his freedom is being compromised and this person is actually taking some control and autonomy away from him. I think that feeling stays way beyond the encounter. So I would struggle with that lie, I have to say.
Yeah. I would say it didn't, because I've got my notes from that day where I've got what happened, and then I've got his behaviour documented immediately after, and then what happened, and it had absolutely no lasting impact. But it's interesting that that's 1 out of 250 lies, and that one always comes into my head.
Yeah,
it definitely.
I mean, I can actually see that. I can see that man and a million other men or women. And it's
absolutely.
one of the worst ones. I've had one woman wrote the pin code on her arm so she could escape, and I thought, good for her.
Yeah, but I mean, she's obviously a lot further earlier in her journey, and this was literally just a flash. But that's what makes it interesting, because all the previous literature said, oh, I only tell therapeutic lies. To be honest, there's probably about 120, 130 of the lies that are recorded were just like Tourette's. They just rolled off people's tongues, because kind of that's what we do. I'll be there in a minute. I'll be 5 minutes. None of which was true. The caveat being, so a pharmacist came and said, I'll come back in 5 minutes. That was a definite lie, because she left the ward and she had no intentions. However, when a nurse or a healthcare says, I'll be there in a minute, quite often they actually mean, I'm coming back, you're on my radar. And it's the truth at the time. It just becomes a lie because somebody else has had a fall down the corridor, or you actually do need to go for a wee. So sometimes we tell the truth that becomes a lie because we can't fulfill it. And that was quite interesting as well. The other thing to throw into the mix is, that there are more lies told when the social mix of the staff is good. And we spend all this time looking at the skill mix, but when the skill mix is right, it doesn't mean the social mix of staff is. And if you have a good mix of social staff that like each other and get on with each other, they'll interact massively with each other, then the lie telling and the banter goes up. And this came about because one day I was on a shift and there was two tribes. There was the Mrs. I'm busy all of the time tribe, and is everybody up? Has everybody been showered? Have we done the breakfasts? And then there was, I've got one up, I'll have a cup of tea before I get anybody else up, and I'll sit and have a bit crack and I'll have a bit chat. So there's clearly two tribes around the shift. They didn't talk to each other. And as a result, the communication with the patients went down massively. At lunchtime, the shifts changed, the mix changed, and everybody who then came on for the afternoon mixed socially, and the level of banter and laughter, including the patients, just went up. And I got 10 lies in the first hour. So I'd got none for the first 8 hours of the shift, and I got 10 in the first hour. So we spend a lot of time looking at skill mix on a shift, when actually sometimes we should be considering the social mix, because that's what makes a difference to people with dementia.
Well, that's amazing, Jane. Thank you. I'm sure we would all love to hear loads more. Unfortunately, we are out of time. So I'm going to have to just say a huge thank you to you for presenting for us today. I think it's been a really interesting webinar. It's had one of the highest amounts of debate and questions that I have certainly had in the months I've been chairing these. So that's just fabulous. So thank you so much, Jane, and loads of lovely messages coming in on the chat to say thank you to you as well.
Yeah. If anybody wants to contact me, my contact details are on the slides. I'm on Twitter and all the usual LinkedIn's and things, or you can use my university email.
Go find you on social, absolutely. And we will be, obviously the recording will go onto YouTube so you can rewatch and distill all the bits and pieces. So I just need to let you all know about our next webinar. So our next webinar is on the 10th of June, 2 till 3 p.m. and it is adaptation of the World Health Organization's eye support for South Asian dementia carers. My colleague Beth Lang has very kindly put the link in the chat. She's also put the link to the evaluation as well. Do let us know what you thought about today's webinar. So do have a look at both of those links. And we hope to see you on another Dementia Community webinar very soon. And thank you again to Jane.
Thank you.